In the center of the grand alien arena, the air was heavy with the sound of thousands of alien voices, mixing together in laughter and mockery, and bright lights from above burned down on the metal floor where a single human stood surrounded by towering alien guards, their weapons humming with dangerous energy, and every seat in the arena was filled with creatures of shapes and sizes. Jack Carter had never imagined some with glowing eyes, some with twisting tentacles, and others with sharp, plated skin. They all stared at him like he was nothing more than a strange animal dragged in for their entertainment. And above the noise, a booming voice from the speakers declared to the galaxy, "The weakest species in the universe will now face its trial." The crowd roared with amusement as Jack stood still, chains locked tight around his wrists and ankles, his mind racing faster than the pulse of the force field around him. The announcer listed his so-called weaknesses: slow, fragile, no claws, no armor, no natural weapons, unable to breathe in hostile worlds, just a soft, vulnerable thing, and Jack kept his head low, letting them think he was scared, letting them believe their lies. But deep inside, his sharp mind was already working because, while they were laughing, he had noticed something. The shimmering wall of energy around the arena was not perfect. There was a pattern to the flicker, like a heartbeat slightly out of rhythm, a tiny weakness in an otherwise flawless prison. And Jack felt a spark of something dangerous, an idea forming in the shadows of his thoughts. The guards pushed him forward, forcing him toward a training pit where alien fighters practiced their strikes on him, each blow sending pain through his body. But each blow also giving him more information, the exact sound their armor made when bending, the faint whir of the strange energy crystals powering their weapons. And as he stumbled to his knees, one guard leaned close to sneer at him, calling him meat, bag, and laughing with sharp, clicking teeth. Jack forced himself to cough and groan, pretending he was broken inside, but in truth he was counting the seconds between the flickers of the force field, memorizing the layout of the energy nodes above them. The crowd wanted a show. They wanted to laugh until their throats were sore, so Jack gave them exactly that. He tripped on purpose. He fell flat when a blow came near. He smiled weakly like a fool when they called him useless, but in his mind, he was back on Earth in the quiet hum of his engineering lab, working on impossible problems that needed impossible solutions. And the more they mocked, the more invisible he became. To their suspicion, hours passed in this cruel dance, and when they finally threw him back into his holding cell, the laughter still echoed through the halls. He sat on the cold floor, pretending to slump in defeat while his eyes scanned the corner where a guard had dropped a shard of a crystal, the same type that powered their weapons and their force fields. And with a slow, deliberate movement, he slid it into his boot, hidden from the cameras. He knew they would test him again tomorrow and the day after that, and each time they would laugh louder. But he also knew something they didn't. Humans didn't need claws or armor to fight. They needed time and a plan. And now Jack had both. And as the alien lights dimmed for the night and the crowds left the arena, he sat there in the dark, feeling the pulse of the crystal against his foot, and whispered so quietly no one else could hear, "Let them laugh, because tomorrow the joke will be on them." The morning cycle began with the blare of alien horns echoing through the metallic corridors. And Jack Carter was yanked from his cell by two guards whose scaled arms were like steel cables, their expressions unreadable except for the glint of amusement in their glowing eyes. They dragged him toward the training grounds again, the massive arena now empty, except for a few hulking warriors who turned to watch him with smirks curling across faces, both familiar and horrifying. Some had mandibles clicking together in a strange rhythm. Others had translucent skin where alien organs pulsed visibly, and they all looked at him as if he were a pet, performing tricks for their boredom. The guards threw him to the ground, and one shoved a weapon into his hand, not to arm him, but to mock him. The handle too large for his fingers, the weight far beyond what his muscles could comfortably manage, and when he stumbled under its mass, they laughed with a sound like broken metal. Grinding together, the alien commander overseeing this farce stepped forward, a towering being with curved horns and armor that shimmered with strange circuitry. He told Jack in a deep, rumbling voice, "Today, you will fight not for victory, but for entertainment. Survive if you can, though none of your kind ever has before." And as the commander turned away, Jack kept his gaze low, not to hide fear, but to hide the spark in his eyes, because every moment in this place was feeding him information, and every weakness in their design was becoming clearer in his mind. They thought humans were slow, but Jack knew how to move with purpose. They thought humans were fragile, but Jack understood how to survive when every second mattered. When the first warrior charged him, swinging a weapon like a spinning blade, Jack did not meet it head-on. He sidestepped, letting the alien's momentum carry him forward, then staggered back, as though by accident, placing himself exactly where he could see the faint blue glow of an energy node high above. And each exchange after that was not about winning, but about positioning himself to map the arena in his head. Every step, every strike, every flicker in the power field etched into his memory, so that later when the time came he could move through it. Blindfolded, the aliens did not see this. They only saw a clumsy human, scrambling to stay alive. The laughter of the watching guards rang in his ears, but he welcomed it, because laughter meant underestimation, and underestimation was the shield he needed after hours of this brutal theater. Jack collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, his body aching, but his mind alive. The guards hauled him back toward the cells, one of them muttering about the main event in 3 days, the human versus Drathox, the beast that had crushed entire teams of warriors in seconds. And the thought of facing such a monster would have terrified any ordinary human. But Jack only filed the name away along with every other detail. They had carelessly dropped the corridor back to his cell, smelled faintly of burnt metal and ozone, a sign that the unstable crystals were overworked. And as they shoved him into his cell, he sat down in the corner, carefully adjusting the shard hidden in his boot. It was still intact, faintly warm against his skin, and in his mind he was already sketching the device he would need to turn that shard into something more than a trinket. In the cell opposite his, a figure moved in the shadows, a slender alien with pale green skin and large dark eyes. She had watched him in silence for days, but now she leaned forward, speaking in a low voice, meant only for him. "You are not what you pretend to be, human," she said, her voice carrying the strange musical tone of her species. Jack gave no reaction outwardly, but his mind sharpened. She introduced herself as Lyra, another prisoner taken from a world the Empire had conquered, and she told him she had seen many species try to resist, all of them failing. "But you," she said, "you are building something. I can feel it in the way you look at the walls, in the way you fall on purpose when they strike." Jack stayed silent, but she smiled faintly and added, "If they find what you are hiding, they will vaporize you before you can take your next breath." Then she withdrew into the shadows, leaving him with those words and the echo of her warning in his ears as the arena lights outside dimmed again. Jack leaned his head against the wall, pretending to sleep, but his thoughts were alive with calculations. The shard in his boot was small but powerful. The arena's power grid was flawed. The guards' routines were predictable, and he had 3 days until the fight with Drathox. In 3 days, the galaxy would still be laughing at. The days that followed were a careful dance between survival and secrecy, and Jack Carter played his part with perfect precision in the eyes of the alien guards. He was still the same stumbling, fragile human, too weak to lift their weapons, too slow to dodge their blows, too foolish to understand the rules of the arena. But behind the curtain of his clumsy movements, every step, every glance, every pause was deliberate. Each night, when the cells fell into darkness and the patrols thinned, Jack worked with his hands hidden beneath the thin blanket, weaving pieces of scrap metal stolen from training gear into the beginnings of something more than the guards could imagine. The shard of unstable crystal he had hidden in his boot now lay in his palm, its faint hum sending tiny vibrations through his skin. He had learned how its energy pulsed in regular waves and how to match those waves with a simple coil of wire scavenged from a cracked comm device smuggled in his pocket during a mock sparring match. The work was slow, each sound of twisting metal masked by the distant roars of alien beasts being trained in another part of the complex. But Jack had patience. He had learned long ago that the longer you let your enemy think they were in control, the harder it would hit them. When you took that control away in the cell across from him, Lyra continued to watch from the shadows, her large dark eyes catching the faintest glint of the crystal when Jack angled it under the blanket. She never asked what exactly he was building, but he could tell she knew more than she let on. One night her voice came quietly through the dim air. "Drathox will not fight you like the others," she warned. "He will not toy with you or try to impress the crowd. He will simply destroy you, and when he does, the audience will cheer and your species will remain a joke." Jack paused his work, glancing up at her silhouette, then whispered back, "Maybe that's what they expect. Maybe that's what—" I want them to expect her head tilted in the shadows, and he thought he saw the faintest smile before she retreated into silence again. The next day, the guards dragged him out for another round of training, this time with heavier armor plates strapped awkwardly to his frame, their weight meant to slow him even further. Each opponent towered over him, their strikes like hammer blows, yet Jack met them with a strange mixture of panic and precision. His dodges looked desperate, but each one carried him closer to certain spots in the arena where the flicker of the force field was weakest. He made mental notes of how the energy shimmered along the seams of the metal plates in the floor and how the glow intensified just before stabilizing again. Every detail was fuel for his plan, and the guards still saw nothing more than a doomed human stumbling toward an inevitable end. After the session, they dragged him back through the long corridors, their claws scraping the walls and muttering to each other in a language they assumed he could not understand. But Jack had been listening for days, and he caught enough to know that preparations for the Drathox fight were almost complete, and that the arena's energy reserves were stretched thin from recent battles. When they threw him into his cell again, Jack immediately checked the device hidden under his blanket. It was still small, just a narrow rod of metal wrapped with wires and crystal fragments, but he could feel its potential. Growing like a spark waiting to ignite, Lyra's voice came once more from the dark. "You know, if you succeed, they will never stop hunting you," she said. Jack didn't look up, just kept working fingers, tightening the last piece of wire. Then he finally answered, "Maybe that's the point. Maybe they need something to fear again." The following night, as the arena's lights dimmed and the rumble of distant machinery faded, Jack tested the device for the first time, pressing the crystal core against the coil. The air around it seemed to tighten, and a faint shimmer rippled across the metal bars of his cell like a heat mirage. He quickly covered it again, heart pounding, because if the guards saw that effect, even for a second, they would know something was wrong in the silence that followed. He lay back, staring at the ceiling, imagining the roar of the crowd in 3 days. Imagining Drathox's charge, imagining the moment when all their laughter would stop and be replaced with the one sound they had never expected from a human victory. The day of the main event arrived with the deafening blare of the arena horns, their deep metallic tones vibrating through the walls of the holding cells and into Jack Carter's bones. He sat on the cold floor, his head bowed as if in defeat, while outside the crowd of thousands poured into the stands, creatures of every imaginable form, pressing close to see the moment they believed would end in a human's quick and humiliating death. The air was heavy with the scent of charged plasma and alien excitement above the arena. The giant screens flashed the name Drathox in burning letters, while the monstrous figure himself waited behind his own gate, his shadow stretching across the sand like a living nightmare. He was 3 times Jack's height, a fusion of muscle and plated armor. His 4 arms ending in claws that had shredded hundreds of opponents before his tusked mouth curved in a cruel grin, and his eyes glowed the color of molten. Gold Jack had seen him only once in passing, and even then he could feel the animal fury radiating from him, but today that fury was not what Jack focused on. Instead, his eyes flicked to the energy nodes embedded high in the arena walls, to the faint shimmer of the force field as it pulsed with unstable light. The guards came for him, their grip hard on his arms as they marched him into the blinding daylight of the arena. The roar of the crowd slammed into him like a wave, and from every direction, he heard the mocking chants human, 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 not as praise but as insult. Jack stumbled forward as if struggling to walk, the armor strapped to him, hanging loose, the narrow rod of his hidden device pressed flat against his side beneath the plating. The announcer's booming voice declared the rules, though they were meaningless in a fight like this one: survive as long as possible, entertain the crowd, die dramatically. The gates opposite Jack began to rise, and Drathox stepped forward each footfall, shaking the ground. The crowd's roar swelled, and Jack let himself backpedal quickly, his arms up in fake defense. Drathox charged, closing the distance in seconds. His first swipe was fast enough to blur the air, but Jack barely dodged, tumbling to the ground and scrambling back as the crowd erupted in laughter. The beast came again, this time swinging both upper arms in a crushing arc. Jack rolled aside each movement, taking him closer to one of the arena's glowing nodes. Drathox snarled and lashed out again, claws catching Jack's armor and sending him skidding across the sand. Pain exploded in his ribs, but through it he counted the flickers in the node's glow. Just one more second. Just one more step. The crowd saw desperation in his movements, but Jack saw alignment, and when Drathox came for the killing blow, Jack twisted low and slammed the rod against the metal plate of the floor where the energy lines converged for a heartbeat. Nothing happened. Then a sharp crack split the air, and the force field around the arena rippled violently. The shimmer fractured like glass under pressure, and a blinding flash of white light erupted across the walls. Alien weapons in the stands sparked and died. The roar of the crowd turned from laughter to confusion. Drathox staggered, blinking in the sudden distortion. Jack rose slowly, the rod still in his grip, its crystal core glowing bright as it drained the unstable energy from the arena's systems. Alarms screamed through the air as control panels across the complex went dark. Guards shouted orders, but their comm devices were silent. The great beast roared and lunged again, but without the stabilizing field, the ground beneath them shook and cracked, and Jack met the charge head-on, not with strength, but with timing, ducking aside so that Drathox's momentum carried him straight into a collapsing section of the wall. Debris rained down as the audience screamed in panic. Now Jack's eyes scanned for the next move, because disabling the arena was only step 1. Step 2 was getting out alive, and he had chaos swallowed the arena like a living storm. The moment the force field failed, alien spectators scrambled over each other in panic, their laughter replaced with shrieks in 100 different voices and colors, the air filled with the hiss of malfunctioning weapons. As sparks showered from the walls, the towering Drathox roared in rage, trapped beneath a fallen section of the arena's support beams, his massive claws slashing at the debris, while Jack Carter moved quickly across the fractured sand, his boots pounding against the ground, every step driven by the pounding knowledge that he had seconds before the guards regrouped. The rod in his hand was hot now, the unstable crystal at its core glowing like a small star pulsing with stolen energy each pulse, sending another wave of disruption through the alien systems around him. The first squad of guards burst from a tunnel on the far side, their armor humming with partial power, but their weapons flickering. Jack ducked behind a broken, slab of wall as the first blasts scorched the air, where he had been moments before he sprinted along the arena's edge. His eyes locked on the docking bay doors high above the audience tiers. If he could reach them, he could get to the ships and maybe escape the roar of another explosion, made him glance back the walls behind him, caving inward as Drathox finally broke free, his glowing eyes locking on Jack's form with pure animal fury. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. As he pushed harder, weaving through panicked aliens who were too busy running for their lives to notice the humans slipping past them. The docking bay entrance was ahead, guarded by two massive sentries, their weapons offline but their size alone, a wall of muscle and plated skin. Jack didn't slow. Instead, he veered toward a small maintenance lift at the side, leaping onto it and slamming his hand against the control panel. The lift jolted upward, painfully slow, but still faster than the guards could climb. Alarms continued to wail across the complex, the alien language booming over the loudspeakers ordering containment at all costs. The lift stopped with a shudder at the upper tier, and Jack darted into the shadowed docking bay, its rows of sleek alien gunships humming faintly in standby mode, each one a fortress of metal and firepower. But Jack's eyes locked onto one that was older, its hull scratched and patched with repairs, and most importantly, its control systems. Still manual, unlike the others that would require a functioning AI interface. He ran for it, sliding into the narrow cockpit and ripping open the panel beneath the console, his fingers flying with the practiced speed of an engineer bypassing safety. Locks rerouting the damaged circuits and feeding the remaining energy from his device into the ignition. The ship rumbled to life, its deep vibration shaking the deck beneath him. From the far end of the bay, guards poured in their weapons, now crackling. Back to full strength, the first shots tore through the air, scorching the hull around him. Jack's hands tightened on the controls as the ship lifted from the deck, the bay doors slowly grinding open to reveal the dark sprawl of space beyond. Then, a voice cut through the chaos, cold and commanding, the alien high commander himself, ordering over the comms for the arena to be destroyed rather than allow the human to escape. Jack's eyes flicked to the screen on the console. A countdown had appeared 60 seconds until total detonation. His stomach tightened as he angled the ship toward the opening. The bay shuddering as the blast doors began to close in response, he shoved the throttle forward, the engines screaming as the ship shot. Through the narrowing gap, laser fire streaking past the cockpit. The moment he cleared the station, he pulled the craft into a hard spin, dodging debris as the first internal explosions ripped through the arena's core. A chain reaction of fire and metal tearing apart behind him. But there was no relief yet, because in his rear display he could see the fleet moving to intercept massive warships angling their weapons toward his position. His jaw clenched as he reached for the console, his mind already forming the dangerous plan that would turn their own systems against them, because now the fight was no longer about escape. It was about making sure the Empire remembered the day they stopped laughing at a human forever. The black stretch of space ahead was littered with the glint of alien warships, their jagged hulls glowing with weapons charged and ready to cut Jack Carter's stolen gunship into dust. The countdown on his console kept ticking down. 40 seconds, 39, 38. Each second a hammer in his chest, he gripped the controls hard, forcing the battered ship into a sharp roll as a volley of plasma fire ripped past, close enough to heat the cockpit glass. His eyes darted between the swarm of interceptors closing in, and the blinking panel under his hands. The alien vessel was built for pilots who trusted automated systems, but Jack had stripped all that away the moment he rerouted power from his crystal device into the ship's core. He was flying on raw mechanical response. Now no firewalls, no lockouts, and no restrictions, just metal circuits and nerve. At 28 seconds, the enemy fleet began to box him in their formation. Perfect. Their confidence, absolute. Jack's lips curled in a faint grim smile. They still thought of him as the joke, the weak prey who had somehow stumbled into luck. He reached for the panel pulling up the ship's FTL drive controls. His hands moved fast, overriding the safety protocols one by one, each warning light, flashing red until the console blared with a piercing alarm. The ship wasn't designed to jump this close to other vessels, but that was exactly the point. The unstable crystals in the arena had taught him something. Alien systems were deeply interconnected, synchronized to avoid tearing each other apart during coordinated maneuvers. If he could trigger his own jump while feeding that same unstable signal back through their network, he could make their systems turn on themselves at 17 seconds. Left the first interceptor locked onto him, weapons ready to fire. Jack's fingers danced over the last sequence, his voice low in the empty cockpit, talking himself through it just like in the lab back on Earth, timing, power feed, pulse, align, and at 14 seconds he hit the trigger. The stolen ship screamed as space itself seemed to ripple around it. The unstable crystal in his rod flared to blinding white, and the alien fleet's perfectly tuned systems hiccuped in unison, then failed. Catastrophically, one warship's shields overloaded, bursting in a chain of explosions that leapt from hull to hull as their shared network fed the chaos in less than 5 seconds. Half the fleet was engulfed in fire and the others scattered too. Avoid the spreading blast wave, the shock wave hit Jack's ship like a giant's hand, shoving him hard into his seat. Alarms wailed, but the stars ahead cleared the path wide open. He slammed the throttle forward, breaking free of the collapsing kill. Box behind him, the alien arena's remains spun silently in the void. A burning carcass drifting in the debris field. The fleet once so certain of their victory now broken and scattered in the stillness that followed. Jack let out a long breath, his hands still tight on the controls, but his mind beginning to feel the weight of what he had done. He had not just escaped, he had humiliated them in front of every world that had been watching. This was no longer a joke to them. This was a warning. The comms panel flickered to life with a scrambled signal. Lyra's voice cutting through faint but urgent. I found a way off one of their carriers heading toward neutral space. You did it, human. They will hunt you forever now. Jack allowed himself a faint smile as he adjusted course, his ship angling toward the faint glimmer of a distant star field. Good, let them hunt, he said softly, because the galaxy had been laughing for too long, and now they would remember the day the weakest species. Struck back, he leaned forward over the controls, watching the stars stretch as the ship's engines burned hotter, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of an empire's pride and the echo of a truth they could never erase.